We are about to embark on an immersive journey through the corridors of our minds. Stand by as we prepare for departure.
Welcome aboard, everyone, to the Productivity with Peace of Mind podcast adventure. Our journey will begin in just a moment. Inhale deeply and exhale. Our voyage takes us on a captivating tour, diving deep into the intricate layers of our thoughts and imagination. Brace yourselves for the complexities of our evolution. For a safe and enjoyable journey, stay seated, secure your helmet and protective goggles, and keep hands, feet, and legs inside while the ride is moving. Now relax and enjoy.
What if I told you that some of the greatest barriers between you and unlocking that next level for your own success is not actually outside of you or part of your external world, but actually something that's happening inside of you? Today, we're going to look inside and uncover what might be holding us back and ways we might be holding ourselves back with today's special guest. Here we have Mandy Morris joining us today, who is an expert in EMDR therapy and executive coaching. She has coached countless leaders to break free from their own limiting beliefs. And she also has a fun project coming up called So Free, which is actually an app where you can take EMDR home and practice on your own, which I personally am super excited about. Welcome, Mandy. It's so great to have you.
Thanks, Lindsay. I'm excited about this. Thanks for having me on. It means a lot. I've always been a big fan of yours, so it's great to be here on your platform doing this with you.
Absolutely. Well, I want to explore with you a little bit about your journey into the world of therapy and kind of how you got there, and specifically EMDR, because that's something that, I have seen EMDR therapists for basically like half my life. So I'm a huge fan and I really, really understand the value. And so I'm super curious how you got into that and how that started.
Yeah, so the nutshell version of how I got decided to become a therapist to begin with. I originally went to college thinking that I was going to be an athletic trainer. I was an athlete all my life, grew up in sports.
Yeah.
Looking back on my life, I was kind of like a mini therapist all along. I was
Oh,
always a go-to person for people. I remember at the time in high school, went to a small private high school, and we had these senior superlatives where I was hoping I'd get like something athletic in nature. And I remember being so
yeah.
mad at the one that I got because it was most caring. I'm like, that's such a bullshit, like senior superlative. Everybody's caring, gosh, and
Yeah.
but really, even in what I wanted to do with athletic training, it's the idea of helping people. And I realized
Right.
that really had grown out of that space. And I started working, or not working, but volunteering at a crisis resource center when I was in college, and fell in love with the women there. I enjoyed it so much. I was a lay counselor, so I could sit with them and talk with them. That was about it, but it really shifted things for me. There was already a shift going on that reaffirmed it. I had started my own therapy for the first time when I was in college, and that therapist was tremendously helpful to me.
Mhm.
And so I made the switch, and into my journey as a therapist, I had heard about EMDR and had heard how quickly clients got results and relief. And that was and the science behind it. I'm a big brain
Yeah.
nerd. Anything about the brain and science and research, I could listen to stuff on that all the time and still do. And So the more I researched it and looked into it, the more intrigued I was, and the more I felt motivated to learn it at the time. When I got certified, there was maybe like, actually, no, there was 50 therapists in the entire state of Georgia even certified in it. So it was very
Wow.
new. It's become a little more mainstream. And the interesting thing is that EMDR has been around since the
Yeah.
90s. The research started in the 80s for it. And, really the longitudinal studies came out in the late 90s, early 2000s. So it's been around for a while. It is just not as mainstream. So I think on the therapist end of it, it is so rewarding to see my clients get results so quickly. Um,
Yes.
Anywhere from like 5 to 15, 16, maybe 20 sessions usually is all that's needed to get through and rewire the brain around uh, various traumas and complex traumas and all of that. And, when you're working with a client for maybe a couple months on end, just trying to get that breakthrough, get that part of the brain rewired, it can be discouraging on both ends, I think. And I noticed for myself that how quickly that can lead to burnout. And so having a type
Mhm.
of therapy where I feel at my best and the client is getting results that they want. And I've, I've also done training under an art therapist, and I've done CBT and DBT and lots of different things. So there's, you know, obviously not, it's not for everybody. Everybody likes certain different types of modalities, but for anybody who's willing to try it and wanting to experience it, I've not had any regrets.
Yeah, I know for myself, when I very first started EMDR therapy, and I had been to, kind of a more, traditional classical therapy before that for many years, and I saw massive results. And I think I was like, gosh, maybe 20 or
Mhm,
so.
mhm,
And so, very quickly, like things started changing and transforming in ways that I hadn't even seen for years in other therapy. And now, I don't do, as intensive of EMDR, but like I won't see a therapist without that background because
Sure.
I want
Yeah.
just that kind of connection and understanding and like, thought process. So I just love that, that's what you do, and that's your
Mhm,
journey is so awesome getting there. And I know there are a lot of misconceptions
mhm,
around, just zooming back out to like therapy in general.
mhm,
There can be a stigma around it. And sometimes, especially in the business world and in the world of executives, right? It might be seen as weakness or kumbaya or, whatever they call it. There can be some misconceptions around that, and you're doing some great work in breaking those barriers because you're actually bridging the two by, you're doing the EMDR therapy, but then you're also doing the executive work. And
mhm.
so tell us a little bit about that and how that's been going.
Yeah. So I would say really in 2020, when the pandemic was going on and I was more virtual and I was sort of expanding my horizons in the various industries I wanted to reach out to. Like I got to work a lot more with musicians and creatives, with their mental health, and
Mhm.
I got exposure to various types of people and industries because I could do a lot more online. And as I was working with more and more high performer type individuals, and
Mhm.
a lot of those people that in those industries I mentioned right there are entrepreneurs, are business owners, and some working for companies in a higher up leadership role. It was so cool to see that as they got better mentally and emotionally, and certain wounds from their past were healed, and that wasn't this weight they were carrying with them anymore, that their businesses also grew. And it's like, of course
Yeah.
that would happen. Why would that not? We're not different people just because
Yeah.
we go to work. And so I really was encouraged that I should expand into the executive coaching world, which I really honestly had a hard time with. And admittedly a little bit of my own ego was like, I'm not going to be a coach. Everybody's a coach, you know?
Right,
And how
right.
do I, and it's not a knock against coaches or anything like that. I mean, clearly I'm doing that now too, but it's how do I set myself apart
Yeah,
from the vast amount of people that are out there saying that they're doing
right.
what I'm now also sort of marketing myself to do. And but just kind of taking that leap and starting to do more content on leadership and just in how you deal with people, like these interpersonal relationships and communication and emotional intelligence being a huge one. I mean, I think when I was really starting to do more content was when there was a big sort of push for making the soft skills become the new hard skills. So there was already some
Yeah,
language around that happening anyway. So it
nice.
fit nicely. And from that I started getting people people started reaching out to me about, interviewing some executive coaches for our CEO. We'd like to interview you if you're open to it. Or, in the different networking groups, various business owners or entrepreneurs decided that they wanted to, see what working with me was like. And so I started to grow that and really
Yeah,
have enjoyed it a lot. It's always interesting because the initial process is more in the present looking future, where therapy is the present stuff that we know is affected by the past. One
yeah.
of the sayings that we have is that the past is present, because 90 to
Mhm.
95% of our brain is subconscious long-term memory. And so how can it not
Yeah,
be? It's the driver of our behaviors. And so, in finding that line, that fine line here, and now working with this group, has been fascinating. And, you know, undoubtedly it is always going to go back to something that got wired in your brain long ago, no matter what it was from. And so I mean, we are just people at the end of the day, and our entire history of experiences and what our relationships have been like, how each person individually process things, what their own psychology looks like. I mean, it all plays a part into whatever they're there to work on to begin with. You know, like a common example, that I'll get from some entrepreneurs is, yeah, I want to increase my revenue. I'm stuck in the same place. I must have blind spots. And I find that entrepreneurs in general are a little more open about
yeah.
their struggles, just because it's them trying to push themselves forward versus like someone working for a company and then them saying that they need this help. And so, the entrepreneurs, there's a little less stigma around them for doing some of this work. And now
Mhm.
companies that have hired me for one of their employees, someone in upper leadership, that's a different ball game. I usually have to be very tactful in the language I use,
Yeah.
and building trust and rapport. And I hate that that's that way,
Mhm.
but there is, and if you think about, most people in upper leadership are still probably, um, you know, a generation up from where I am, to maybe two, just kind of depending on it. And, a lot of it goes back to how you grew up and what you grew up in, and did you or did you not talk about certain things, and what is the perception of your own perception of mental health, or your family's perception of mental health, because oftentimes we don't even realize how much we stigmatize mental health on our own. I had a big realization that I was stigmatizing myself when I
Mm.
was going through some really difficult times in my marriage, ultimately going, headed towards divorce. And I was like, well, I'm a therapist and now I'm in therapy. And I remember feeling this like shame. I'm like, wait a second, I believe in this. Like,
Yeah.
there is this sort of, what does this say that it means about me as a person, that I'm getting help, that we all have to come to terms with. But um, in my experience, the especially those where I've been hired by someone else to work with them, those who have been the most open to it, even if it's taken some time and we've had to build some trust and rapport and, come up with what are their goals, and we'll stay within the realm of their goals and all of that, um, that really have succeeded past what they thought like they could get to. And just the amount of less stress that's carried, the higher performance that happens, being able to see things that normally you don't see. It just, I could go on and on about it. So um, it's it's kind of sad, and I'm trying to break the stigma of this, but a lot of times in those situations where I'm hired by a company to work for their executive or to coach their executive, uh, they don't, once they find out that I'm also a therapist, these sort of walls go up. And um and they have to double check or triple check with me that we're not doing therapy, right? Um and I once I have rapport with them, I really want to say, well, maybe that means that you need some therapy, or, need some help at least, if you're thinking that,
Yeah.
well, I don't want to go there, because there's always room for
Yeah.
growth, and
Yeah.
it's all just a mindset. And ultimately, the working with uh, high performers, achievers, people in leadership, it's really been life-giving for me. It's a different type of energy. I love my therapy work with my clients at my practice, and I love this work. They're just different, and it's been really nice to use my skill set for helping people grow their businesses and for helping people develop their leadership in a way that's really healthy.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, I was even at a professional dinner last night, and we were having a very, very similar conversation. And even one of our C-level executives was saying, one of the presidents of one of our brands had brought in some curriculum, on some more soft skills. And even this, particular executive had said, I wasn't really for it in the beginning. I didn't understand until I saw what it did
Yeah.
for the teams and the
Yep.
difference it made.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things that I always say to people is that we are not thinking machines that feel. We are feeling beings
Yeah.
that think. And that's
Yes.
so hard for some people to understand. But even from a neuroscience biology standpoint, that uh, you know, our limbic system, our amygdala, those are the things that light up first, and then it's our mind that tries to make sense of
Um,
them, right?
yeah,
And so it's our body responding to what's around us, and that happens first before anything becomes intellectual or cognitive. And so for someone to disregard the emotional intelligence side of things, or the soft skills, or the interpersonal relationships, is really um, they're really doing themselves a disservice, and they're not going to live up to the potential that they have in what they're trying to do.
totally. Well, I mean, it's like what we talked about before, is it's how we hold ourselves back, right? It's almost like self-sabotaging. And there's different things that some of us might be dealing with, like
Mhm.
PTSD or CPTSD. And I know sometimes people think of, PTSD as just like the war, but that's not always
Right,
the case. And sometimes
right.
it's complex and chronic. And so tell us a little bit about how EMDR specifically helps with those types of conditions and what that process looks like.
hmm Sure. So, um, complex trauma, that really refers to trauma that has happened over a long period of time. It can be multiple incidences of it. There's, just for the listeners' understanding, so that we have big T traumas is what we typically think of when we think of trauma. Those are near life or near death experiences. Those are,
Mhm.
witnessing violence, or seeing someone die, or being afraid for your own life, or rape or murder. Those very extraordinary things that happen, that we think that when we think about trauma. Small t traumas, those refer more to like adverse childhood experiences or any type of trauma that's happened, um, that is more chronic in nature, such as neglect, not having all your basic needs met growing up, or if you lived in a household with someone with a mental illness or an addiction, or going through bad relationships, getting a divorce, and these patterns that happen over time.
Mhm.
And while this might seem just a part of life thing, it still affects the brain the same on a psychological standpoint as the big T traumas do. And so it's not uncommon that I'll get people come to my office and be like, well, I've not had any trauma. I've had a great childhood. I've had, all these things.
Yeah.
And when we start to break it down, it's like, okay, let's replace the word trauma with an overwhelming life experience. Have you ever had an
Yeah.
overwhelming life experience? Yes. Okay. Well, then it's an overused word. So people don't always understand,
Yeah.
what that means, and there's not always good information out there about what it is.
Yeah.
And so with EMDR, what we do is we target the belief about self that has been created because of these overwhelming life experiences, because that's part of
Yeah.
what creates post-traumatic stress symptoms. One of the examples that I give about myself, it's a very benign example, but it proves the point on how the belief system impacts someone's own mental and emotional well-being. So when I was in second or third grade, my family had moved down to Georgia from Baltimore and for my dad's job, and didn't have a ton of friends at the time. There was two friends that I had, two girls, uh, that I felt like I was sort of friends with. I kind of was picking up that I was still kind of getting left out a lot. And I was already insecure. I grew up with two older brothers, and I
Mhm.
had big poofy hair, not met a hair straightener yet. I hadn't gotten braces yet. I was misprescribed these big red glasses, and, just paint the picture for yourself. And was very aware, very, very conscious of my appearance. And
Yeah.
so I remember one day, I don't know what got into me, but I decided to ask this one girl, like, how come you hang out with her more than me? And without missing a beat, she said, because she's prettier than you. And then like the girls walked off, and I'm like
Mhm.
crying on the recess playground and don't say a word to anybody.
Yeah.
Because if anybody's ever grown up with older siblings or older brothers, showing emotion, uh, that wasn't always well received, or they just make fun of you more, or whatever it is, just siblings being
Mhm.
siblings. But
Mhm.
so this wasn't a conscious thing, but as an adult looking back and doing some of my own work that I've done,
Yeah.
I could see how after that experience, any real or perceived negative social interaction I had, to me, went back to something wrong with me. I wasn't smart enough.
Mhm.
I wasn't good enough. I wasn't pretty enough. I wasn't, whatever it was. And
Yeah.
so I could look back and see over time where my anxiety started, where my social anxiety kind of developed, where people pleasing behavior started to happen, where uh you know body issues or body image stuff happened, where lack of boundaries, like, and so on and so forth, right? And
Mhm.
if, like, let's say this had been someone else, or let's say my mind hadn't internalized things the way that it had and been like, well,
Mhm.
guess I'm going to find some new friends, forget them, not a big deal,
Yeah.
then that belief wouldn't have been created. And who knows, that belief could have, the seed of that could have even happened before that event, but that's the most notable one to me. And
Yeah.
so we really focus heavily on targeting the belief, because that creates what we call a neural network, and that's connected to thoughts, feelings, beliefs, and experiences. So typically when I ask people, like, let's say that they come in, a common one is feeling not good enough. That's a very common
Mhm.
universal belief that people will feel. What's the
Yeah.
earliest time you felt that way? A lot of times people can point that back into a younger year of their life, early childhood maybe. And then they'll give me the list of other times throughout their life where that belief has always felt true. And it's not that you're continuing to not be good enough, it's that our mind can't hold conflicting beliefs. And so once you form the
Yeah.
belief about yourself, your mind's going to find evidence for it. And so it gets reinforced time after time again. And with EMDR, once we pinpoint what that belief is connected to the traumas that you've been through, that's creating your anxiety or your unhappiness or your depression or continuing to be in bad relationships over and over, whatever it may be, addiction issues, all of that. Um,
Mhm.
uh, that unhealthy, maladaptive belief stays stored in the wrong part of the brain, stays stored in the fight, flight, or freeze system, our survival mechanism. So when your mind picks up on something that feels associated to a similar thought, feeling, um, anything from uh, a similar maybe environment or anything that your brain picks up on connected to that, you get activated, you get anxious, you have an overreaction to something, you feel more emotional about something that maybe feels disproportionate, whatever it may be. And what
Mhm.
EMDR does is it focuses on that, and then we incorporate bilateral stimulation, which is a long word for
Mhm.
meaning left and right side of the body. And
Mhm.
so we alternate different, we call BLS modalities, whether that is tapping left and right side of the body. In my office, I have these TheraTappers that pulse back and forth. Um,
Mhm.
and what that does is it allows the left and right hemisphere of the brain to talk to each other while we have honed in on the part of the brain that where things are stuck. And it allows your
Yeah.
mind to organize the information and make sense of things. And while it's doing that, it's also repairing your nervous system because it's getting things unstuck. So it's getting it unstuck
Mhm.
out of the nervous system. And then once it's resolved, it's stored in the correct part of the brain in your long-term memory so that when you retrieve that information, there's not this emotional charge connected to it. And so we're now not having the same symptoms. As a client, I had EMDR therapy. I mean, when I was getting trained in it, we had to experience it, but then I also did my own EMDR therapy. And part of my symptoms at the time was high anxiety. I was, hypervigilance, night terrors. Uh, if it wasn't a night terror, it was a nightmare. There was just lots of
Mhm.
anxiety most of the time. And for me, and I was targeting an isolated incident that happened, took me about 5 or 6 sessions, and I haven't had a night terror since then, right? And
Mhm.
so the profound um, results that EMDR get you is, I mean, gosh, I can't even imagine still
Mhm.
operating that way,
Right. Right.
and it's like a completely different person, feel more of myself than I've ever felt, right? Um, and so the yeah, that's kind of how the mechanisms of it work. And with complex trauma, that's the good thing about EMDR is that even with complex trauma, we're still focusing on a belief. And so it doesn't matter how
Mhm.
many times that trauma or something traumatic has happened or that same experience of whether it was childhood abuse or whatever it was that happened that was damaging in your marriage or in relationships, all we need to know is the belief. And
Yeah.
in this process, there's actually not a whole lot of talking that happens because it actually slows the process down. So it's very different than normal
Mhm.
talk therapy. I mean, you're fully awake and
Mhm.
in control, um, but uh, your mind starts to resolve these things. And the the other point I was going to make with that is that for people who are like, I don't want to rehash things, I don't want to share what happened. It's hard, like it's hard enough
Mhm.
to think about. I don't even want to talk about it. Is um,
Yeah.
because we're focusing on the belief, you don't have to share details of what happened for this to work. You don't have to share much at
Mhm.
all for this to work.
Right.
And so that's really appealing for a lot of people for that reason. So I don't know if I
Yeah.
answered your initial question because I just kind of went off on that, but that's a little bit about EMDR.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And I can definitely relate to the thought, oh, I don't have trauma because,
Hmm.
if you would have asked me 2 years ago what, if I had trauma, I probably would have told you no. And I think that differentiation of capital T and little t trauma is huge because it could be something as small as you're 8 years old, you've been playing on, the playground and you come in and you want to tell your mom something cool and your mom has had a super stressful day. She is at her wit's end. Maybe her boss just yelled at her and you come and you're like, mom, I gotta tell you something. And she's like, what? And you're like, oh, what I say doesn't matter.
Hmm.
And that gets right. And then those little
Hmm.
seeds get planted. So it's
Yep.
like we all do have our own version of the things that we've learned.
Yep.
Nobody's really exempt. So I love the idea too of like, okay, maybe not trauma, but an overwhelming experience that we've had,
Hmm. Yeah.
to go back and look at, and even like the capital T traumas that I've had in my upbringing, even that I look back and I'm like, well, I didn't grow up in war. I didn't grow up in
Right.
poverty, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
still
We start
justify.
comparing traumas. Yeah.
Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah,
Minimizing them.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So that's really relatable, I think, to,
Hmm.
that mindset of like, oh, well, like surely mine wasn't the worst, so
Sure.
I can't complain.
Yeah.
And that's also like another one of those barriers we put up of I'm not
Hmm.
going to look at that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, when I was a new therapist, one of the things that kept me from putting myself back into therapy when I was going through um, what I was going through in my marriage, he ended up being formally diagnosed with a narcissistic personality disorder, and that
Hmm.
relationship became there was lots of traumatic things that happened throughout all of that. But I remember sitting with
Hmm.
clients and thinking, well, it's not as bad as them. It's not as bad
Right,
as what
right,
I'm hearing right here, like in my own head,
right,
I would never say that out loud to any of them.
right,
But I started like minimizing my own stuff in comparison to things that I would hear from clients. And I
right.
think that's a common thing that we all do. Well, a lot of people have it worse, or something like that.
Yeah.
When we don't we can't compare our own suffering to someone else's suffering because um whatever you're experiencing is completely valid. And if it's affecting you, it's affecting you.
Right, right, exactly. So, do you have any good examples of maybe one of the CEOs that you've worked with, or an executive who, went through this process with you, and maybe they had some resistance or they had some question marks, but then you broke those barriers with them, and what did that look like on the other side?
Sure. Yeah. Um, so I'm thinking of a common theme with a few business owners and entrepreneurs who maybe have been wanting to increase their revenue. Um, they feel stuck in some way, or things aren't running as smoothly, or don't know how to get to like that next level. Um,
Yeah.
and so, in the course of us working through what's been going on and me taking inventory over they're sharing with me symptoms. I want to find the
Mhm.
cause of the symptom.
Yes. Yeah.
And um with the EMDR training that I have, I know that looking at our operating system is very important. And so one of the things that I created that takes pieces of sort of the theories of EMDR, as well as some other therapies that I do, is I created a process called Success DNA. And Success DNA helps you break down what is your current operating system. And we look at what are the symptoms, meaning thoughts, feelings, and behaviors that you can observe within yourself that are why you came to talk to me to begin with.
Hmm.
A lot of things like procrastination or avoidance, or not, why don't I get the credit card from my client? Or why don't I set up a system where all these things are in place, and then I don't have to ask them about money, or why didn't I get them to sign that thing, and it's like
Mm.
all these little self-sabotaging behaviors that happen, um,
Yeah.
or a sense of thinking, well, scarcity mindset can be a common one too, of um, I'm not going to raise my rates because I'm afraid I'll lose clients, something like
Mm-hmm.
that. Right. And
Yeah.
so it can go back to a lot of things. A common one that I see in entrepreneurs specifically, is this feeling of, and I'm very careful in how I say that, because it's not what you cognitively know. It's not what you intellectually or
Mm-hmm.
logically know. It's how it
Mm-hmm.
feels. And that's one of the biggest differentiations, is because if you could have thought your way out of your problems, you would have already, but it has nothing to do with how smart or
Right.
capable you are. It has to do
Okay.
with an ingrained belief. And
Mm.
so we look on the surface, and then what does it feel like it means about you when you don't hit that, monthly mark? You don't, the client doesn't pay you. You've not increased your
Yeah.
rates. Like, I, for a lot of them, it could be something like a feeling of, I'm a failure.
Yeah.
Well, and without a doubt, I'll ask, well, what's the earliest time in your life you ever remember feeling like a failure? I can remember clients giving examples as early as 3 years old to 5, 6, 7 years old. I was doing this one thing with my mom, and the next thing I knew, she threw a toy at me, and I just felt like I couldn't do it right, like I had failed in
Yeah.
some way. And
Mm.
like I said earlier, is you know the seed of one belief, if that doesn't get repaired pretty quickly, like let's say if that parent had said, like, I'm so sorry, I reacted poorly, you didn't do anything wrong, and was very nurturing and loving and caring, and it's like,
Yeah.
oh, okay, but a lot of times that doesn't happen. And so
Right.
just the next time something that even hits at that same emotion comes up, it's reinforcing this belief. So for a lot of clients, it's a feeling like I'm a failure, or a sense of I'm responsible for everything, and that's overwhelming, so I just shut down. Or like I said earlier, a lot of common ones is not being good enough. And so what I'll do is I'll walk them through that. And the non-EMDR approach is, after we've identified that, making it really clear on how do you know when you're in this old operating system, because that system served you well for a long time for
Mm-hmm.
some reason, you know,
Yep.
like let's say um, that belief of being a failure made you suppress certain parts of yourself so that you wouldn't get in trouble, or so that um, maybe some perfectionism tendency, so you're now overcompensating or whatever it may be. But either way, you're not authentically able to be your true self. You've
Mm-hmm.
suppressed certain thoughts and feelings and parts of yourself, which led to feelings of anxiety and depression, and so on and so forth. And you needed to do that to survive those painful times, maybe when you were younger, but it's not serving you well as an adult anymore. But it's still coming up. And so when we can bring what's subconscious conscious, we can then work on it. So that's where I'm like
Mm-hmm.
pulling things out, not to dig
Yeah.
up old demons or things that you don't want to talk about. We're just
Yeah.
increasing self-awareness so that we know how to then tend to that part of ourselves. And then what we can do is, well, what are times that you remember feeling like you're capable and competent and enough, and we're drawing from other life experiences where that wasn't the case, where the opposite really felt true. And what do you notice
Yeah.
about how you act differently, how you think differently, how you respond to yourself and respond to the world and respond to your clients differently when you're in this adaptive, healthier, upgraded self? And we work through what that looks like, and then how to quickly, cross over onto the newer, software update, if you will, operating system, And, you know, and there's more to it in terms of like accountability and having safeguards and things like that.
Mhm.
And for clients that I have who know what I do, that I'm also a therapist, I'll tell them what EMDR is. I'll just give them some information on it. I'll tell them to go look it up, go to my website. It has a bunch of info on there, read
Mhm.
about it. And if you want to get unstuck in just a couple sessions and you want to give it a try, even though it's different, I say we try it. And if they want to, then we do. Um, and so you know, obviously I don't ever, try to make anybody do anything they don't want to do. But,
Mhm.
usually when they're already seeing good results and then they want to continue that,
Yeah.
or are just so sick and tired of being sick and tired that like, I'll try anything. I mean, those are the
Yeah.
best clients to work with because they're just hungry for, um, to be better and to do better and to be in that next season of life and out of the one that they're in, and so they're willing to try stuff that works. So that's a little bit of a breakdown of the process.
You made a really good point too, because you go through the process of EMDR and you go back and you can reprocess and redo some of those beliefs and thoughts that you're having. But you made a point about, the child who, if the parent had come back and said, "Hey, that was wrong. I'm sorry. You're safe. I love you."
Hmm.
That's going back and closing the loop, right? So it's
Right.
it's closing that gap for us so that we're not creating those bad
Hmm.
patterns and beliefs in our brains that are not helpful for us or get us where we want. So I'm
Exactly.
curious now, like, okay, let's say, we're a leader who has gone through EMDR therapy and all of that, but then maybe something new happens that's
Mhm.
traumatizing. What can we do to close the loop in real time so that we don't continue to take on any new unhelpful beliefs and thoughts about ourselves or anything that we're doing?
Yeah, yeah. One, I would say first and foremost is um, the need to externalize what you're experiencing. So sharing it with someone. It can be a
Mm,
friend, it could be your spouse, it could be
yeah.
anyone. Because something traumatic, trauma is what isn't what happened to us, it's what our body
Mhm.
experiences because of what happened to us. We can't
Right.
change history, but that experience in the body and how it's rocked the nervous system or your sense of self, that is there. And for someone who's been through, um, EMDR or just their own work in identifying what does it feel like it means about me. It feels like I'm not safe. It feels like I didn't know how to protect myself. It feels like I I was to blame. I'm at fault. I'm responsible. I
Yeah.
wasn't good enough, whatever it is. If you
Yeah.
know how to identify that belief. And it's not what you know, it's how it
Yeah.
feels. And you tell yourself
Mhm.
what's true. You tell your brain because there's that fight or flight system, that survival mechanism part of the brain is on high alert and it needs to be calmed down. Right.
Yeah.
And um one, acknowledging how you feel is very important. So I feel
Mhm.
scared, I feel angry, sad, upset, an emotion word.
Mhm.
There's a phrase that I love, and it's name it to tame it. By
Oh,
the
cool. I
act of
like
acknowledging the emotional experience that you're having, and adults are bad
yeah.
at this. The average
Yeah.
adult can only name three typically: anger, sadness, and happiness. When
Mm.
we know that that's like having three crayons in the crayon box when we have like a whole rainbow and plus
Yeah.
of that. So being able to identify that gives you enough hit of dopamine that you need to kind of calm the brain down, and then being able to tell yourself what is true in the present versus how it feels like I wasn't safe, but I'm safe now. I survived
Yes.
this. I um I felt like I couldn't protect myself, but I did because I made it out of it. Or I didn't feel good
Yeah.
enough, but I would never say that to somebody else. I know I have value regardless of what happened. Like, you're and it's so we want to try to hit on that negative thought process, negative belief about self that's happening. And and really speak about what's really true to yourself, because not everybody who goes through trauma develops post-traumatic stress. You know,
Right.
with the DSM, there has to be a minimum of 6 months of certain criteria of symptoms that have happened for that to be diagnosable. And it's normal to have some post-traumatic stress type symptoms, but it doesn't mean that they'll last necessarily.
Right.
And and so if you can, you know, tend to that to begin with, or get in for a few sessions of something with a trained
Yeah.
clinician who
Yeah.
who's trauma informed and knows what to do with trauma, that may be all you need to
Yeah.
eradicate any future, you know, potential post-traumatic stress symptoms. And that just made me think of too, like because of what I do, I see a lot of people in active military or veterans or police officers, first responders, and
Mm.
um, the common assumption is that, trauma that happens from, let's say, the military, or, veterans who are coming for, post-traumatic stress because of stuff that happened there. Um, the trauma, if we're looking at it from a belief system, so I want to make sure I say this clearly. The things that they experience, if they did experience some traumatic events, are traumatic events. But the belief
Mhm.
connected to the trauma usually was formed well before that experience happened. Most people who
Mm.
go into the military are usually escaping home life. Not all the time, but a lot of
Okay.
times that feels more appealing to go off somewhere than to stay where they're at, for
Right.
whatever reason that may be. And it is more rare than it is common, to not to work with someone in that sort of field and there's not pre-existing trauma. Um, so just the kind of, as we are, putting the pieces together of um, what makes the post-traumatic stress and what happens if you just experience a traumatic event. There's lots of things at play there. But yeah, like I said before, if you can begin to have language and how you comfort yourself and how you process what you just experienced in a way that's healthy and adaptive, that's great. It's always best to do that with someone, even if it's just talking to a good friend. We would never do a complex math problem in our head. We would write it out on paper. We would externalize it
Yeah.
in some way. And that gives us the relief that we need just to even be able to talk it out sometimes.
Yeah, that's putting it back in our control, right? Like that's putting us back in the driver's seat because we know, okay, like that bad thing happened. I can't control the environment, but I can control what I do about it. So I
Mhm.
love that. And that's exactly what you're doing with the So Free app. So
Mm.
I know that's still coming and this is really exciting. I'm
Yeah.
super, super excited about it. But tell us a little bit about what that will look like and how we can take some of this treatment home with us.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm very excited about So Free. So, um, this was a few years ago now. I was on a run one day and I was thinking about bilateral stimulation. So, um, bilateral stimulation that I was talking about earlier, whether that's through tapping left to right side of the body, it could be the sides of the legs, walking is bilateral. Um,
Mhm.
if you go to the doctor's office and if your arms or legs are crossed and they're going to take your blood pressure, they'll make you uncross your arms or legs because it shows a
Yep.
drop in your heart rate. Um, and because bilateral stimulation makes the parasympathetic nervous system, the nervous system that's your rest and digest nervous system that helps you relax, come online. So I've taken from EMDR just the BLS part of it, the bilateral stimulation
Mhm.
part of it. And I
Yeah.
had this idea of, why have we not combined this with like all of our technology that can read biometrics and heart rate and all these things. And so I brought the idea to my brother of, um, can we create an app where we use these biometrics and we catch people's stress before they even realize they are, because a lot of the technology can tell your increase in heart rate. Okay, is that because of exercise, or is that an
Wow.
abnormal, flux in your daily life because you're stressed?
Right.
And what if we could catch it and then have a prompt where bilateral stimulation was done for you, because it makes your heart rate go down really quickly.
Yeah.
And so my brother and I had started working on the app, and we kind of tabled it. And then not this past Thanksgiving, but the Thanksgiving before, we unexpectedly lost our oldest brother. And
Mm,
the months following were just, I mean, the whole year following, but really the first few months following were just
yeah.
horrible. And we just decided like we need to do something. So let's just start on the app. If not for
Yeah.
anybody but us, like we could use it right now. And
Yeah.
so we started it, and my brother is the CTO of So Free and co-founder, and is an amazing tech guy, and he's really helped this idea that I had come to life, and has made it
Mhm.
even more than I thought it could ever be. And so essentially, um, we have an app called So Free that's close to going into beta launch. And what it will do is, if you, we have a patent pending on the technology right now, and essentially it'll get connected to your wearable. And so let's say you have one of your wearables on, and it's like, Lindsay, you're from these 8 different biometric readings, we're showing that you're
Mhm.
stressed. Do you want to start a
Yeah.
BLS session? And from there, you have 3 different options. You have So Free Feel, and what So Free Feel is a vibration from your wearable on one side of your body to your phone that has the app on the other side of your body. So, if you have your watch on, let's say, and your phone in your pocket, you start it, and it'll just alternate vibrations left and right side of the body. And if you don't want to do that, you could do So Free Here. This is one of my favorites because it is the most discreet. You could be in a meeting. Well, you could really be in a meeting with the other one too, and no one know that you're actually, this thing is actually doing this. But you just put your
Mhm.
earpods in, and it sends tones that are of specific hertz and frequencies that are of brainwaves of a relaxed state to the left and
Mhm.
right side earpods that you have in. Or if you don't have any of those on, you don't have a wearable on, but you know you're getting stressed, or you feel your heart rate going up, you can put the app on. And the original method of bilateral stimulation, which is eye movements, you can hold
Mhm.
your phone at the distance that it tells you to hold it, and you will watch this ball go back and forth, left to right. And the claim is that it is instant stress relief in under 2 minutes with 0 side effects. So literally in under 2 minutes, you can regain sort of that neutral state. You can get that gross stress, anxiety feeling off of you. If you're catching it before it's at that worst point, that's even better, because now you're not even going offline cognitively. You're able to still function and perform. And then we have other modalities that are for sleep, that are for focus, and then for relaxation as well. So people who want to sign up to be a part of the beta can go to getsofree.com, and very excited to get that going. We're hoping to get that out to the world this year in 2024, because we're close. We're very, very close to it, but very excited about it.
That's amazing. I'm super excited. Well, I'll definitely be sharing that from the rooftops because I mean, that's revolutionary for stress, for
Mhm.
dysregulation, for, right? Like just like you
Yeah.
said, getting ourselves back online and like staying in control of
Hmm.
ourselves so that we
Yeah.
catch ourselves before we slip too far to
Yep.
where we're not even going to get help or we're not going to do anything to help ourselves.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and one of my thoughts was early on with all of this is, some of my frustration is that, a lot of these calm apps, relaxation apps, breathing apps, whatever they are, it's in response to stress, not in the prevention
Mhm.
of it. And so we're
Right.
still putting out fires, which means that we're
Yes.
still getting the cortisol and adrenal dumps, and having this stress response chemically happen in our body, where if that could get caught earlier on, we don't have to have these highs that then we crash afterwards, because stress and anxiety utilizes 70% of our body's system. So we're fatigued and tired and depleted once we come down off of that. And that's just not a way to
Mhm.
function.
Right. Well, and like when you talk about like when you go so far that you do go offline, these, apps with like a short little meditation or a mindfulness activity,
Hmm.
your brain's not even in a space to receive that anyway.
Right.
Like
Right.
it's so far gone that doesn't even help. Even if
Hmm.
it is,
Yeah.
reactive, it's not even giving you a
Yeah.
solution.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. And those apps are great skill builders. Like those
Yeah.
are, they
Yeah.
have their place and they're
Yeah.
beneficial, and
Yeah.
they're not always what's the word I'm looking for, but they're not those skills, we're not able to retrieve that information when we're in high states of stress all the time,
Right.
unless you are avid about the habits of doing those day in and day out. And so
Right.
it's not always practical to be able to do those things. And, we wanted to provide something that is practical and effortless, that are
Hmm.
doesn't take much time. It doesn't take any of your energy. It gives you energy. And so you can just get back to what you're doing. This is going to be great for people before they go on to stage, or before they have a difficult meeting, or before they have to present things in front of people, or kids have to take a test, or you're anticipating talking to your mom this Friday, and that's
Hmm.
always sends you off the handle after you get off the call, or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
And it's quick, and it doesn't take much time out of your life to do it.
Yeah, that's amazing. I'm super excited. So you've talked about, our belief systems and how that shapes our actions and behaviors, which then leads to those results that we're getting in our life.
Mhm.
Let's just say we are your client coming in, we're a leader, and we sit down in your office and you're going to help us create that new operating system for our success. What does that look like? Walk us through that.
Mhm. Yeah, so once we've identified what the old is, we know what
Hmm.
we don't want, right?
Yep.
So what is the desired result? Um,
Yeah.
so let's take an example. So, I talked about maybe the person who has that belief of I'm a failure, and that it doesn't come up with an
Yep.
actual conscious thought of being a failure. It more shows up in
Right.
not having boundaries, or some sort of self-sabotaging behavior, or maybe negativity towards self, maybe feeling depressed or anxious at times, um,
Hmm.
feeling like you're not measuring up, things like that.
Yeah.
And so then we talk through, well, if you are someone who is operating out of a sense of knowing that you are competent and have value regardless, let's say, um, how do you think you would operate when you first interact with, a client, or at work, with whatever it is that you
Hmm.
do? And we come up with a list of thoughts and feelings and behaviors that my client has actually experienced before at times. We pull from a range of experiences where you have felt at your best, you have felt um, proud and competent and confident. And what was that like? How did you operate differently? It's pretty unanimous. Usually it's like, well, I didn't think so much, I just did. I
Yeah.
felt very, very calm and not flustered. I was able to think pretty clearly. And at the end of it
Hmm.
all, I was actually more energized than I was depleted. And so, because the things that you're going to look for first are the things that you saw first to begin with that you didn't like, is I was having these sorts of negative thoughts, and it's like, oh, I'm in that old way of being. So now I need to affirm to myself what's true. I'm calm, or I'm competent, I'm resourceful, I know what I'm doing, I am good enough. And because I've had them draw from experiences in their life where they have already felt that way before, and we've
Hmm.
gone through a process of helping your mind remember that experience. And, with bilateral stimulation, we will, tap in those memories to reinforce that from a nervous system approach. So once they've gone through that
Yeah.
process and they've recalled those good experiences, and they catch themselves and they move over to back to those same memories. Now their body is actually remembering what it's like to feel that way, which makes
Mm.
them able to operate that way. And we come up
Yeah.
with things to things to tell your mind, different sort of cognitive skills and mindset skills, and um, even what to do if you're starting to physically feel some tension somewhere that is connected to maybe those old thoughts and behaviors. And
Mhm.
so, really, really looking at the person as a whole, and from their muscular tension to their thoughts, as to what all this looks like. And the more you train yourself to move over into this healthy, adaptive way of operating, your success DNA way of operating, then
Mhm.
that becomes the habit over time, and then that becomes how you operate as that system gets strengthened and the other system gets weakened.
Yeah, and then when we look at maybe some unhealthy relationships that we've had or self-destructive habits, some of these things that we're doing that we know aren't so great for us, but it's just kind of like part of that operating system that we don't
Mhm.
want. How do we go in and use, learning about our past experiences, uncovering those subconscious beliefs and bringing that into the conscious and then reframing it? How do we use that to then break some of those maybe not so healthy cycles?
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I think one of the first things is, um, in addition to sort of that method conceptually, um, is one to practice being mindful of what you're feeling and how your body is holding what you're feeling. Because our body, our gut has already picked up on the fact that something's off. We're just
Yeah.
dismissing it, or we're
Mm.
because we're afraid of being alone. Let's say, if in the relationship analogy, um
Yep.
we're talking ourselves out of something, and or it's fine, or that person just did that because they had a bad day, or whatever those things are that
Yeah.
are some of those common trains of thoughts. But to be able to pause and be like, oh, I'm doing it again, and to sit
Mm.
and accept the actual thing that you're feeling, which I'm actually not feeling so secure with this person right now. I'm actually
Yeah.
feeling kind of nervous or anxious. I'm actually feeling really lonely, which is why I'm reaching out again, and
Mm.
you can accept that feeling. And acceptance of a feeling isn't saying that it's okay or it's good or it's bad. It's just
Yeah.
what is. This is what's
Mhm.
happening. I'm in acceptance of sitting with this, and that's the hardest thing to do, because it's it's hard to tolerate pain. And
Mhm.
um and for those who've been through abuse of any kind before, oftentimes we tolerate pain too much, and so it's
Mm.
just too normal, right?
Yeah.
But one of the acronyms that I really like in those cases that you're talking about is the acronym ADD. And I don't mean attention deficit disorder. I mean accept. So accepting of the state of being that you're in, name it to tame it. We're putting in a word, an emotional word to the
Mhm.
experience, and then
Yeah.
delay. I'm going to delay this urge to reach out to the person, even though I know I shouldn't. I'm going to delay the urge for some sort of self-harming behavior that normally I would be engaging in. I'm going to delay the fact that um, uh, I maybe am staying with this person right now, and I'm going to delay my, or I'm going to, um, I'm going to actually delay this idea, this fear of going for 10 minutes as I kind of sort through these feelings, and then I'm going to go. Or in these other case situations where maybe you're by yourself and you're could be more of a self-harm or a engaging in a behavior or reaching out to someone that's toxic or whatever it may be, then you distract yourself. So accept, delay, distract. And moving through that method can really help people get control of this unhealthy pattern that is so reinforced and re-ingrained over time.
All right. So you have shared so much knowledge with us today, Mandy, and this has been absolutely incredible. I know we could talk about this all day long, but what is the one thing that if we don't know where to start, that we should all go do right away? Like, what is the one most important thing where we should start first?
I think the one most important thing is to have an honest conversation with yourself. And
Mm,
instead of pulling your boots up by the bootstrap, or continuing to suffer in silence, or feeling like, well, this is just the way I am, things aren't going to be different, so I guess I just got to deal with it, whatever those sort of rationalizations are that are you kind of giving up on yourself in some way, is
yeah.
to have that honest conversation with yourself and then share it with someone else. From there, you can take there's lots of different directions you can go with, you can go in, but the saying of admitting you have a problem is the first step is true.
Yeah.
And denial is just a way of not looking at things honestly because they're painful. But
Mhm.
I 100% believe that everybody can hold space for that pain with themselves, because you've already been through so much already, and you've survived every moment of that and every day of that. And so to be able to hold yourself in warm, positive regard, to admit that I have a problem, there's a problem, something's not right in my life because of blank that's going on. And then to find someone you can trust. And if there isn't anyone that you can trust in your life, that's why there's therapists and coaches out there who can hold space for that.
Yeah.
Just tell
Yeah.
somebody. And then you can take it from there.
Thank you. That's incredible. Well, truly, thank you so much for coming on here today, sharing your wisdom and your knowledge with us, and, really uncovering the truth and the importance of what therapy and coaching really is and why that matters so much when we do want to create that lasting change in our life, both personally and professionally. And sometimes when we're stuck, to get to that next level and, like, really being honest, like you said, with ourselves about how do we get to that next level. So this has been an absolute gift. And speaking of gifts, you have a free offering for us today. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And before I share that, thank you for having me on. And I'm very honored. I think very highly of you. I've loved the times when we were around each other, getting to know you as a person. And so it's been great to kind of re-engage with you and to see you thriving in what you're doing now and what you're doing with this podcast. So it's a gift for me to be on here. So thank you for that. But the gift for everybody listening, or if you know of someone that you want to send this to and share this with, is that I do a free 1 hour consultation. So even if I'm not for you or to help you, but you just want insights in a direction that you think would be helpful for you to go in, I'm happy to sit with anybody and hopefully at least point you in the right direction, if not with me, in a direction that could be.
Awesome. And we'll put information in the show notes on how to access that and do some awesome groundbreaking work. Thank you so much, Mandy. This has been incredible.
Thanks, Lindsay.
Thank you for braving the inside of your mind with me. The better we understand ourselves, the more deeply we understand the world, and as our awareness grows, life just gets better and better. If you've enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to leave a review and share this with anyone else you think could benefit from listening. A quick reminder that the content shared in this podcast is for informational purposes only. I am not a licensed therapist, and the discussions here are not a substitute for professional advice. If you're dealing with a specific issue or need personalized guidance, please consult with a qualified professional. Your well-being is important, and this podcast is simply a platform for sharing insights and experiences. I appreciate you spending this time with me. Until next time.